Taf Tzadi Amud Aleph, right at the top of the Amud. Boy, Rami Bar Chama, Shtei Amos Begag, Shtei Amos Va'amud Mahu. Now, we learned previously that according to the Chachamim, the rooftops are considered separate rishuyos. So you can't carry from one gag, a gag that's owned by one person. You cannot carry it to a gag, a rooftop that's owned by somebody else. So Rami Bar Chama has a shaila, therefore. What about Shtei Amos Begag? If he's carrying 2 amos for the gag, and then another 2 amos on an amud. And with an amud, a post that's standing near it, as standing in the street next to the gag. Meaning, he's not carrying more than dalet amos, but he's carrying from one rishus to the other rishus. Now we said, according to the Chachamim, that the Carmelist, that the gag, you can't carry from one to the other, so the gag is considered to be a Carmelist. You can't carry from one to the other, so we consider it to be separate rishuyos, and it's considered to be a Carmelist, therefore, where the carrying from Rishus Yachid, from a different Rishus to the gag is also. So over here, he says, yes, the Chacham say you cannot carry from one rooftop to another rooftop if they're owned, if they're different ownerships. But what about from a gag to a post? And the post is 10 tefachim high, and it's dalet al dalet. So the post, even if the post is in Rishus Rabim, but if it has those dimensions, it's considered Rishus Yachid. So for the Gemara, Amar Rabba, my kami boile. Well, what's the shaila over here? Carmeles or Rishus Yachid kami boile. Is he asking a shaila? Can you carry from a Carmeles to a Rishus Yachid? Well, of course you can't carry from a Carmeles to a Rishus Yachid. What's the shaila over here? Of course it's also. So why does he even have the shaila? Taisus points out that we're defining this amud as a Rishus HaYachid. It must be that there's a separation between this post and the gag. There must be a separation of dalet. Because if it's within dalet of the gag, it would not be considered to be Rishus HaYachid. Since it's open to the gag, which is a Carmelis, we wouldn't give it a din of a Rishus HaYachid. It would be considered similarly Carmelis, because it's completely open and exposed to the gag. But we're talking where it's pulled away somewhat from the gag. So then Rabbi asks, this is a very simple case. It's a Carmelis to a Rishus HaYachid. Of course it's also. So the more now explains. Rami Bar Chama, what's his shaila? Why did he have the shaila? Agav churva lo. Really, that's not the case of the shaila. He was just so quick-minded, he didn't specify and elaborate on the precise case. And it's not a question from the gag to the amud. That certainly would be awesome. This is what his shaila is. His question is, if it's 2 amos in the gag and you're carrying it from there to an achsadra, to a portico, to an area that has a roof but no walls and has a portico, can you carry from one to the other? Did the Chachamim answer just like they answered from a gag to a gag where there's different ownerships? Did they answer from a gag to a case of an achsadra? So now the Gemara will explain what's behind, what's underlying this question. Do we say, since neither of these areas are roy for deer, that's not fit for residence, you don't live on a rooftop, you use it, but you don't live there. You don't live in a portico, you use it, but you don't live there. So they're considered fundamentally one, so it's considered like one rishus, so there should be no isser from carrying from one to the other. They're not considered to be separate rishuyos. Oidilma came into Migaga also. Or do we say that since it's also from one rooftop to another rooftop, it's also from a rooftop to an achsadra? That was his shaila. So Rashi explains as follows. We answer from a house to a house, if it has different ownerships, it has a primary use. There's a residence. So we say different ownerships then create the isser. Now, a rooftop to rooftop, people don't live on a rooftop, but since we say there's the Yuram Lamata, that we consider it the Yuram Lamala. So we consider it like it's a 2 ownerships and from a residence to a residence, which are considered to be distinct in different areas. Therefore, the Chum say you can't carry from one to the other. You can't carry from one to the other because they're considered to be distinct in different areas. But essentially an area that's not of a residence, so people don't live there, is not really considered to be a distinct area. So perhaps we would say as follows. A rooftop on its own is not a residence. An achsadra is not a residence. So you should be allowed to carry from an achsadra to a gag to an achsadra, because neither of them are considered to be residences, and therefore they're not distinct from each other to that extent, and they should be considered one and should be considered mutter. Or do you say no? Just like we say from gag to gag, we say that there's the Yurim Lamata, there's the Yurim Lamala. So the gag is considered to be a residence, and you can't carry it from one gag to another. Then we'd say from a gag to an achsadra, also you can't carry, they're considered to be distinct. Meaning, we do say that a gag, one gag to another, that it's osir, but that's only because Kishem Shadirim Lamata, Dirim Lamala, but on its own the gag is not a residence. Is that enough to consider the gag to be a distinct and separate area, even when it's not vis-a-vis another gag, even when it's only vis-a-vis an achsadra? Or do we say no, it's only when you have two gagas, they're both considered distinct because Kishem Shadirim Lamata, Dirim Lamala, when they're both of them are that, but if it's only one, it's not that distinct from the achsadra to say that it's also. So that was a shaila. Boy, Ravi Bar Abaye had another shaila, Beis Hamas begag or Beis Hamas bechurba mal. Well, what would be if it's a rooftop and carrying from the rooftop to a churba, to a ruin? Omar Rav Kahani says, Lavhaina the Rambar Cham is not the same shaila that we just had. You're talking about two areas which are not residences. Omar Ravi Bar Abaye of Chemiacha. Asoy, he said, do you think that I've come to you with a kasha from somebody else's question? That I'm just taking somebody else's question and asking? No, this case is not the same as the case before, as the gag to the achsadra. Why is that? Achsadra like chazal, because on a achsadra you don't live on. Even mishas chak, you don't sleep and you don't live in an achsadra. But churba chazal, but a churba, ruin, is b'shas chak. You could live there. It's yes, some of the walls are ruined and destroyed, demolished, but it still has a structure. There's still a structure there. You could live there. So perhaps we would consider this to be a dira, and just like from gag to gag, it's also gag to a churba would be also. So it's a different shaila. Frank, the Gemara of chazal adir, Mike and Boyle, if you're saying it's chazal adir, so what's your shaila? Then it's two places which are chazal adir. Your answer is no. He explains as false. Imtim salaim rakama. It's imtim salaim. If you were going to say imtim salaim rachsadra lechazal adira, if you say that an achsadra lo chazal adira, and therefore from a gag to achsadra is muter, but so therefore being muter, that but churba chazal adira, but a churba we would consider to be chazal adira, and therefore it should be also. Or perhaps we say no. Hashta mia less by diurin. It could be used for a dira. It could be used, but in the meantime, in the interim, it's not being used. It's a ruin. It's not, people aren't living there. It's only has the potential to be used as a dira, but in the meantime, it's not a dira, and therefore it should be muter teku. It's a teku. Now, even though the Gemara over here says teku to these shilas, to the shilah about an achsadra and by a churba, but it's much from Tesis, and the Ritva elaborates on this, is that from the Gemara and Daf Tzadi Aleph from its base, it is mashma from the Brisa that it brings down that the criteria over here is not ownership, the real criteria is usage, and therefore since it's not used as a residence, then it would be mutter even though it belongs to different owners. Another point to note over here is that when we're talking about the achsadra, we're talking about the portico, so we're saying that from the gag, the shaila was, is it considered to be from a carmelist to a carmelist? Why do we consider this achsadra to be a carmelist? Why do we consider it to be a carmelist, not a rishus yochid? So Rashi explains two pshatim. One, the second pshat is the way the Rashash is masber. The first pshat is that it's considered that we're talking about the rooftop of the achsadra, which is yoisri beis hasaim, and it's loy hukaf ladira. An area of yoisri beis hasaim shaloi hukaf ladira is a carmelist. Alternatively, we're talking about the inside of the the portico, the inside of the Hofstedter, not the top of it. We're talking about the inside of it. And it's considered as an Hofstedter, by definition, it has a roof but not walls. And we're talking where it has a slanted roof, so therefore you don't say pitikra yard v'saisim. It would be a flat roof, you would say pitikra yard v'saisim b'yushus, but we're talking about a slanted roof so that you don't say pitikra, and therefore it's not rishus yochid. Now we learned previously that according to the Chachamim, they say the different rooftops are considered to be distinct and separate. You cannot carry from one to the other if there's different ownerships. We had a machlekes Rav and Shmuel. What about carrying on one rooftop on its own? So from one to the other, one rooftop is owned by one person, the other by the other, it's awesome. But what about carrying within the same rooftop or on the same rooftop? So Rav said it's only mutar b'dalet amos. You can't carry even on the same rooftop more than dalet amos. Shmuel says you can be metaltal b'kula. Within the whole, that one roof, you can be metaltal, but not from one to the other. Now we also learned in the Mishnah that Reb Meir says that the roofs are all considered one rishus. So you could carry from one to the other, so long as there's no difference in elevation of more than 10 tefachim. So now the Gemara has the following shaila. Gagin hashavim Reb Meir. Well, if you have adjoining rooftops and they're shavim, there's no difference in elevation. There's no 10 tefachim difference in the height of the one to the other. The gag yechid l'Rabbanan, or if you have a singular rooftop according to the Rabbanan, what is the din about carrying? Rav Amar mutar talta b'kula. Rav says you can carry on the entire rooftop. Ushmuel Amar ein metalton boy el b'dalet. But Shmuel says no, you can only carry with dalet amos, not more than dalet amos. For the Gemara, the obvious contradiction, Rav, Amar mutar l'talta b'kula, kasha de Rav, adar Rav. How can you say that it's mutar l'talta b'kula? The previous case we learned before, when you have adjoining rooftops. So Rav said you can't carry from one to the other, of course, according to the Chachamim. You can't even carry on one rooftop more than dalet amos. Now here he's saying if you only have one roof, then you can carry on the whole rooftop. Well, what's the difference if you have rooftop to adjoining rooftops? Each rooftop you're saying you can only carry dalet amos. Well, if you only have one rooftop, Rav is saying you can carry on the whole rooftop. What's the difference between the two? So the more answers, there, when you have adjoining rooftops, the walls are not nicker. The walls are not visible. You can't see the walls. But over here, the walls are recognizable. They're visible. What does that mean? When you have the adjoining rooftops, so the houses are joined together, the wall is between them, but it's concealed. The roofs cover them, so you don't see the wall. So Rav holds the shlit also, therefore you cannot say good asik mechitza. So therefore we do not treat it like there is a wall separating the two rooftops. Therefore, he says, they're exposed open to each other, and therefore you can't carry from one to the other. You can't even carry on the rooftop because each rooftop is poritz b'malua l'mokam ha'asrla. You can't carry from one to the other. You can't even carry on one because there's no wall separating the two. The parts b'malua l'mokam ha'asrla. So that's why it's awesome. But that's in the case where you have adjoining rooftops. If you only have one, well, here you have the side walls of the house, and they're recognizable, they're nicker, you'd say, gurachzik mechitza. So it's like you have an enclosed area. So therefore, it's like a rishus yochid, and you can carry within the whole area, you can carry on the entire rooftop. Over here, since they're not adjoining houses, the walls that extend down are all nicker, you'd say gurachzik mechitza, and you have an enclosed area, and therefore it's mutter. Now, what about Shmuel? So Shmuel Amar ein metalton boyel b'dalet amos. Shmuel says no, you can only carry with dalet amos. So kasha de Shmuel out of Shmuel, it's ochara steer and Shmuel de Shmuel. Madach, if you have adjoining rooftops, Shmuel says you can carry on each one on the whole roof. If you only have one, why should you not be able to? More answers, you should be able to, and you are mutter. But over here, we're talking about a particular case. Over here, we're saying, over there, over there where Shmuel says it's mutter, it's because the area of the roof is not more than a beis hasayim. So you don't have that area, and therefore, there's no issur to carry. Now, the chamor geyser on an area that it was more than a base asayim, that, and it's loy hukaf ladira, it hasn't been enclosed with a residential area, that it's treated as a carmelis and you cannot carry there. There, where Shmuel says it's mutter on the whole rooftop, over there it's not more than a base asayim. But this case over here that Shmuel Aser did, over here it's more than a base asayim. And that's why, so it's more than 5,000 square amos, the area over here, and therefore it is treated like a carmelis. Now, why is it treated like a carmelis? We say that an area, a karpov that's more than a base asayim, shaloi hukaf ledira, is a carmelis. Now, even if you're saying the particular case that we're talking about over here is more than a base asayim, but also you have to say it's considered loy hukaf ledira. Why is that so? Now, even though there are walls, but those are the side walls of the house. These walls are made to enclose the house. They're for the residential purpose of the residents below, not for the rooftop. So they're not made to enclose the roof. So they're not made to enclose the roof. Now, even if you would say good asik, we would view the walls as coming up, but they're not made to enclose the rooftop and not made made for privacy and usage for residential use of the rooftop. They're made for the bottom. We view it as good asik, that it's rising above, but it's not built for the residents, for residential purposes on top of the roof. So therefore, and any karpa that is more than Beisayim, which is not enclosed for residential purposes, you can only carry bedalit. It's treated as a carmelis, and therefore you can only carry there bedalit. And therefore, that's in this particular case, that's why Shmuel says that it's also. Now Rashi points out that our shail over here, we're talking about, according to Rameir, that you have several rooftops and they're on one elevation, not one is higher than the other by 10 tefachim. He says, in this case, if you take the total of the rooftops, it is more than a base asayim.